All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to call the ETSB Ad Hoc Finance Committee meeting to order. Please call the roll.
Oh, do you have to do the little blurby thing?
Pursuant to Illinois Attorney General's guidance to public bodies and on the Open Meetings Act during the COVID-19 pandemic, dated July 2nd, 2020, board members may participate without being physically present in compliance with established provisions.
Okay. Shorzy.
Here.
Franz.
Here.
Henry.
Here.
Ranowitz.
Here.
Tegmeyer.
Here.
Teams. Here. All present and accounted for,
All
sir.
right, thank you. Any public comments?
None.
Okay. Just a couple things with regards. I just want to make sure it's on the record. Item number 8 on our agenda says our next meeting, July 15th, is at 1. It is actually at 2 o'clock in this room, and Zoom will be allowed. I know that will be allowed through, I think, what, July 24th or something. So please mark that as 2 p.m. Other than that, you know, I'm looking forward to having a good, healthy discussion on this, and then learning a few things. And I think we're all here for the right reasons. And you know, I guess with that being said, we'll turn it over to our executive director.
Okay. So the entire board got all of the handouts so that everybody could be equally informed, and that included a memo that was, it felt long, but provided some overview of the tabs and what the contents of the Excel tabs were. I did not print the budget this year simply because since you did a 10-year projection, we tried a couple of different ways and it was just really unusable because of the length of the spreadsheet. So it was just easier to give all of you an Excel spreadsheet to kind of to look at those numbers and check my math. So from that point, I think if you know, if you're looking at the memo, or if you go to the Excel spreadsheet, hold on a second. You may or may not be able to see it, but
That looks good.
there we go.
Good.
But the numbers are just the visual. Okay. So basically, you know, this is the overview of where we're at, and we'll start with the revenue page. Just get that out so you can see it. So basically, we'll start with revenue. And what I did this year was, if you're looking at the top of the sheet, rows 1 through 14 are kind of the revenue projection. So we're looking actually at cash. We're not looking at the budget, we're looking at cash. And so the first lines, column, you know, those are the and then column B is your checkbook, column C is your money market account, column D is your investment. And then I did some reconciliation of what I project the end year costs are going to be. And then the column F that says treasurer's report. Each month, after the month closes, the treasurer's office does the reconciliation and then prints the treasurer's report, and that's approved under the consent agenda at the county board. So that's where these numbers come from. And so where we've had a report posted through April 30th, and we anticipate in May there'll be another one. I've posted those numbers because that's your actual cash minus your payment of claims. G and H are just your operating and capital budget, the capital contingency line item. And then J shows the actual operating for those months, but it's not deducted here. It's just shown because it would have been shown in the reconciliation through the treasurer's report columns B through F. So it's just shown there for point of reference. And then the ending balance. So if we go all the way, so we've done the projection. If we go all the way to line 14K, that's our projected ending balance if we pay all the things we think we're going to pay through the fiscal year. That number comes down into that box C for previous balance. we've estimated the surcharge, and there's supplemental tabs that talk about where we are at 14.2 million annually. So revenue plus previous balance, what we anticipate the budget will be pending the board. But what we have in there today is the starting number. The capital contingency contribution, the PSAP reimbursement, and that leaves you with your unobligated or investment funds. So the reason that the PSAP reimbursement number is out separately is it's not an operating cost per se. So when we, and we broke it out this way, I worked with Jeff Martinovich too, the county chief finance officer, because it's not really an operating budget, and it's something we're going to do, but it doesn't really go into operating expenses. And so when we're trying to look at where you could cut or what we're spending money on in terms of the operation of the system, it's not really that number, but it's in the budget here. So it doesn't show in the operating budget, but it shows in this revenue as a plan. So we would put it in someplace later on in terms of appropriation. Does that make sense? Good. So we go along, and then I'll just go across into column H. So that box is capital replacement, the capital replacement forecast. And it took it out 10 years as you asked. And we start with what the number, the balance number is right now. And even though we started with 17.5, we took some money out for the radios that were destroyed in that hazmat. We expect to be reimbursed by the insurance company for that, but in the meantime, that's what our number's at. So this is the transfer. So this is the transfer E, column E to I. So that's that 6.5 million, right? That you're going to earmark. And then the capital, and then the next line, J, is what we anticipate we may be spending next year in capital costs with the radio project going forward. And then the ending balance would be 11 million. So that's how that reads. But if we go and look at the operating, we'll go back to operating for the moment. And in the, so we did a 10-year projection of the budget. Where you get to the gray box here, this is where we don't really have a lot of contracts going along. So I'm making a 3% estimation of contract based on past contract practice. So, this could be plus or minus. Also, this is where, we're going to start looking at how we replace systems. So, some of these maintenance numbers can change as well. Contracts, whether we keep things, we're going to have to add text to 911, things like that. So this goes along pretty handy until, as I said, in the memo that I gave you, we get to around, oops, I can see my formula. FY27 is where we start seeing the operating expenses sort of overtaking the revenue, our anticipated surcharge revenue. Because as we get down to the 10-year mark, we show a deficit there. Now, all is not lost. It's 10 years down the line. And as I said in my memo, this assumes a couple of things. It assumes that we're going to, that the surcharge will remain roughly the same. It also assumes that the 911 equipment will be relatively the same over the next 10 years. And the directors feel that that's going to change. And so, but is it a plus or minus? You don't know. The cost to replace equipment, the assumption is that it'll be roughly the same. We don't know that, but we'll have a better idea of where we stand, because in the next 2 years, we're going to be replacing a lot of things. So we'll have a better idea of where we land. Because remember, the last time we did this, we did it for 4 PSAPs. Now we're 2. So things are a little bit different. And, members, Tegmeyer and teams have different ideas about how we can do this with 2 PSAPs. So this will look a little bit differently overall, right? And then ETSB will, this also assumes ETSB will continue to earmark funds for portable radio replacement. Not that anybody's opposed to that, other than the FCC might be, although in reading the information, that large, page turner that I sent you all this morning, it looks allowable, and then there's some conflicting language in there later on about except for portable radios other than for the dispatch. And I'm like, So I've dished that off to the state's attorney so we can start looking at where we might be funding something that could be considered a diversion. And so then that could change too. And looking at where the specifics fall and how the state's going to line up with that. That's number 5. Currently, all items currently expensed by ETSB will continue to be allowable costs according to federal and state statute. So we might have to make some changes there. We also assume that the COLT multiplier will stay the same. I used a 2%, which has been the county practice for as long as I've been here. So 13 years is a pretty good, guesstimation. Contract multiplier is 3%, as I said, based on past contracts. So there's going to be some adjustment here. Also, as we've talked about in the past, if there's something that we refresh instead of replace, that equipment replacement schedule, instead of, if for example, we did CPE and we budgeted 2.1 million for that replacement and it comes in at 1 million, then we make those contribution adjustments to keep on track and go from there. So there's some, when you go out 10 years, there's some fairly large assumptions here that could be really kind of skewed because there's just so much that's going to change. And again, we still don't know what the statewide network costs are going to be and how that's going to impact things. And there's also declining revenue on the wireline side, which we've been seeing in the distribution. So that number gets a little, scary toward the end, but it's when you look, but then if you go to the capital replacement side, so we're back to columns H through K over here. What we've done here is play out based on the equipment replacement schedule. And again, that could push. And, we might be able to go longer on something, or we might not have to replace something right away, or something could become obsolete because it becomes incorporated into another piece of equipment. The other thing too is these are whole numbers in single years. We know from past practice that, it's taken 3 years to pay for something. Milestone wise by the time we implement something. This forecast is also based on the ability to pay for radios over a 4-year period. So, if we're funding the equipment, the picture, the balance is here. The picture, when you get down to the bottom line of 20, line 29 over here, there's a healthy balance for radio replacement. Now, I just did it half. 12 million. But that's assuming that we would be replacing radios at that point. But so in reality, if you made some other financial decisions, let's say we think that this ends up being accurate and the board elects not to fund radios and gives people 10 years notice, then you're whole to the good $12 million. This then changes the picture drastically. Or the FCC says you can't do it, then this changes things drastically and how we contribute. So that's the overview picture. I can stop there if people want to ask questions.
If people have questions.
I've got 2 quick ones, I think. Linda, good job with this spreadsheet. Really kind of, you walking through it really answers a lot of the questions to begin with. But 2 quick ones. You said replacing the radios in 4 years. Are we replacing them in 2 years?
So if you're going to replace radios, I think you want to be under contract this year, but it assumed payment over 4 years and then replacement in 10. Then they would be good for 10.
And so payment in 4 years. So are you looking at the 12 million, 6 million, 6 million?
I am looking at payment of over 4 years. So it's this line, and I estimated at 25 million based on.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's what I hear your chiefs talking about. And then divided that by 4 and put it over a 4-year period.
Okay, can you go back to the other spreadsheet?
Sure.
So that $12 million is not just radios. That's a variety of things. In fiscal year 22, in K19 or J19.
Yes, so over here, it shows you exactly what we're talking about
All
here.
right. Okay, all right, I understand.
Because one thing we failed to be able to do was spread out those replacements a little bit wider, like we had hoped to do 4 years ago, and it's all sort of landing at the same time again. But the good news is if we do it now, then we'll have a better idea for the next 10 years of where we're gonna be. After that.
Right. Okay. And then my other question was on the revenue side. You mentioned that landline revenue is decreasing and everyone has seen that trend for a while. I just don't know the answer to this question. What's the trend on the wireless side? Is there an increase we've seen pretty consistently, or is it all over the board?
So an increase of calls, yes. You know, in the last 2 months, the county system has hit 90% wireless calls consistently. So number of calls, yes. In terms of number of wireless accounts, hard to know. Those numbers aren't wholly reported. We have to go to the FCC reporting documents to find what those are. But you know, I guess I just generally figure every 6th grader gets a phone. So however many 6th graders there are in the county, that's the increase every year.
Yeah. Let's get all our data from the junior high schools. I agree. That's a good way to go.
Yeah.
But we haven't necessarily been able to track the revenue, if there's a revenue trend that's been going up on the wireless side necessarily. It's kind of all over.
I'm not sure how to answer your question. So, you know, before the equalization surcharge, we got a check from the state for wireless. It was based on zip code. Wireline we received directly, and we had an idea of how many counts. Every year, AT&T provides us with a wireline count, and that's the part that's decreasing. When I started here, it was around 900,000. Today, we're at 600,000. And AT&T says they lose approximately 7 to 10% of their accounts on a monthly basis. That's probably leveled off. We haven't talked about it in probably a year, but they may have leveled off because really today the places that are going to have what we consider wireline, which would include voice over IP phone systems, are major businesses. So most businesses are maintaining their wireline, but it's home wireline that's going away. You know, most people it's cheaper to have a cell phone in the house. That's the house phone than it is to have a wireline. Or if they have it, it's because it's part of their cable package. You know.
I think if you hit the surcharge tab, it'll sort of show what he's asking.
It doesn't. This shows, right, it does show it's fairly level, but this is the surcharge tab, but I'm talking statewide and the distribution of the surcharge. So one of the things that happens is you have a hold harmless number of 2.5 million that you get from the state annually in that 14 that we collect, and that's based on our 2015 wireline revenue number. We know if we do the math on how many lines we have today, we know that number would be 1.5 million. So that formula today is a little bit skewed statewide, and one of the things the state board continues to look at is how do we make that equitable, and how do we get out from under that formula if people aren't necessarily having that kind of wireline. So we're looking at that. There is the other thing that's this number in this trend here is that you see some ups and downs, and part of that is every year the board has set us, and since the inception of the newest statute in 2015, has set aside $5 million a year for consolidation reimbursements, which we've taken advantage of. If that whole number isn't, if that 5 million isn't awarded annually, it goes back into the distribution. But prior to, the state has to collect that 5 million or withhold that 5 million from the surcharge that's being collected in order to be able to pay those grants. So they're collecting it out of the monthly revenue that they receive. And then when the awards are done and they know how much they're going to award, if it's only 3 million, then 2 million goes back into distribution. So some of the up and down that you see is for that. So I don't know that it necessarily shows you a complete trend there.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question.
Okay.
Any other questions?
On revenue. Or where we're at. I didn't know quite what I say anything.
Moving on.
Okay, so then the next part of your tab is the equipment replacement schedule. And I showed it a couple different ways. So this is where, so the top part talks about fiscal year, what we're looking at. So it's kind of a repeat of that box on the first tab and outlines exactly what's scheduled to be replaced that year. And again, remember, it's kind of up and I'm doing whole numbers, but so that we can talk about it reasonably without doing a whole bunch of math. And then in the lower level, this is everything we have so far. And then that goes out 10 years. And every different color is when we would normally, according to today's equipment, be replacing. Now, this is a point where this committee can make a recommendation. Here's the new things that are added this year that today are allowable costs. The AC/DC generator and AC/DC UPS, the DUCOM generator and the DUCOM UPS, and then this one I just added. You don't get to comment on this one because we need them. We put all of the servers into this line item that ETSB uses for fire station alerting, Smart 911, NetMotion, and all those things. And then what would happen in those years of replacement is, you know, for example, if you decided you didn't want Smart 911, then we would take that out. If we weren't going to do NetMotion or fire station alerting or some of the other things we're doing, then we would take that out. But I put it in there just to hold the number. So it's really the generators and the UPSs and putting money aside. Usable life on those are, 10 to 15 years. So ETSB could support the payment of that. So that's a decision that you can, and I added the OEM shelter because we have an obligation to the county for that as well. And that's an intergovernmental agreement. So if you want to leave them in, you can. If you don't, is there a reason why we wouldn't want to leave them in? I don't know. They weren't in before, so I'm asking if you take them out, let's see, benefit all of us.
Benefits the whole county.
Right.
Are you asking, Linda, is it just an expense that should be borne by the PSAPs and could in theory be paid for with the $1 million contribution every year? Is that the question?
No, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead. I was gonna say, no, the question was, is there a reason why we wouldn't just have it as an allowable cost that ETSB plans for as a line item budget?
I think Linda's just saying we have some flexibility, but it sounds like it's an expense that is beneficial expense and it would really be, no reason to remove it unless, there was something else that might take priority over that. Am I incorrect?
Well, over time, that's 1.6 million. Okay.
Over
Plus or
how
minus.
long?
Pardon?
Over 10 years or over the 15?
Over the 10 that I have in here.
Okay.
I stopped going out any further because it's an allowable cost. It's not something that was in the equipment replacement before, so it's new. So the old policy that I'm in the process of updating based on what you're doing today on equipment replacement said, and I'm just bringing it to this committee because we'll start here, but it says, that you'll discuss what you want to include in here. So this is something you could include. And after yesterday, nobody's going to quibble about needing a generator or UPS.
Well, let me ask you this, how long does a generator last for the facility?
15 to 20 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
So you have it spread out among 10 years. but the fact is, it could be spread out about 15 years or something like that. But you only went 10 years.
I put them in at a million at 10 years because at the point of FY22, they're now 12 years old. We could reduce this number and just agree to whatever's been earmarked at the time. That's what you pull off at the time. You have to be.
Our village has a pretty big generator and it's 21 years old now, but it's the maintenance of it, right? The things that have to be replaced, if we just maintain it, it's cheaper to do that than replace the whole darn thing. So.
Well, and we contribute to the maintenance of,
You do.
right. Or the ETSB does UPS and maintenance, because your bigger expense for the UPSs will be the batteries. Every couple of years will be a couple $100,000, which I think you'll be happy to have ETSB pick up the cost of.
Yeah, I have to give some thought. I have to check how this relates to my lease with the county, if that makes sense. I mean, I'm paying the county and I'm not sure whether they expected the replacement of these types of systems or not. They do know that we're doing the maintenance of them separate. They're not included in their lease, but I've got to look at that.
So you're responsible for maintenance, but you don't know for sure.
I
They're
gotta double
responsible for
check, yeah,
replacement.
in the lease of what my responsibility would be on the UPS. And then the only other thought on the UPS is I think our UPSs in the two facilities are slightly different. And we may have to look at what the replacement cost is, because there's two UPS systems at DUCOM, two separate whole systems. So I think we just had to check that.
Meaning the dollar amount you're looking at?
Yeah, I'm not, yeah, I'd have to look to see and what the like what it would be to replace the brains. I mean, because it's parts and pieces. If the batteries are being replaced, that's already factored and budgeted, and they're probably costs on a UPS. They probably cost almost as much as the UPS itself, the brains. But there's brain boxes for each UPS system as well.
It's the computerized part.
Right. That makes it all happen.
So something to think about, but that if you don't think it's necessary and ETSB continues to pick up the batteries and the maintenance contracts, then that gives you $1.6 million out of equipment replacement that you'd have to cover in costs. It doesn't change the contribution amount currently. Because remember that none of these generators are in this schedule to be replaced in the next 10 years. So you're setting aside money, or you're looking at that money, but you're not, it's not in that schedule for replacement.
Having not gotten through anything with the FCC this morning, that email, do you know or has there been any discussion on the reservation of 911 money being reserved over long periods of time? In other words, I know that's what we think is the best practice. That's what we've encouraged doing, setting up a capital fund. But is there any FCC rules or state rules coming that would bring that money that's, again, we put over 10 years, 1.6 in the bank, and then could somebody say, well, you shouldn't have done that? You know what I mean?
I read through it once.
Okay.
It was a page turner. It doesn't, I have some questions too, which is where I gave it to the state's attorney, because it talks about, for example, training costs, but it doesn't talk about expenses for training, travel, things like that. And it doesn't opine to that. It just says what you can spend it on, not not when. So what is the question, not when. And I think it's a reasonable assumption that you have to sometimes save money in order, it's not a zero-based budget, really. You'd have to be able to save to buy a CAD system, so.
Yeah, I mean, I still
It
think
seems reasonable, but
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I just worry that, again, also whether it's where we get our guidance of, but the concept of money is sort of in the financial world, it's restricted because it's only for allowable expenses. But, when we earmark it, how do we earmark it? And I mean, I think it's been our practice that if we start a capital fund, it's just saved, and if we needed to spend it for something, I mean, that's the flexibility, right? Like in 10 years, you don't need a UPS system, then it could be used for something else. It's us planning our money well and then make sure. I'm just curious. I think what we're doing is 100% right on that. I'm just curious if there's going to be any future regulations on that type of stuff as the FCC is delving into new territories.
So yeah, so far I haven't seen any, like I said, it's mostly what, not when,
Okay.
in terms of funds, what you can spend it on. But that's why I said it's a little bit, I don't know. But, you know, we struggled, DuPage ETSB struggled with that in 2015 because we have a cash balance and people think that's too much. But how else do you pay your bills? You know, if you have $30 million in obligations over the next 5 years, shouldn't you be, and you only get 50, and you only get 14 a year, then you don't have any cash per se in you know, in financial speak. But people look at whole numbers and it's, you know. So this is kind of your schedule for now. So that's that'll be one of the questions of how do you feel about keeping the generators in or out? Like I said, it's in there, but it doesn't, it's not, it doesn't come into play in the next 10 years. So it's kind of a misnomer in the sense of you're still, it's not going to change the 6.5 million that you need over the next 10 years in that regard.
Linda, you had said that there's an obligation to for the OEM shelter to the county. That's because of the Starcom site there, or what is our obligation to that?
So that you, when the radio project was done, ETSB paid for the shelter and the tower strengthening, and so that included the generator. So the building is the ETSB's responsibility. So at some point down the road, there, you know, if that generator fails and it's not covered under insurance, you'd have to have some replacement money there. That's a much smaller generator. That's probably like a $15,000 generator. I think, I don't remember what number I put in there. I put 50. I was generous. But so, you know, I mean, and these are rounder numbers, but again, you know, you have insurance for certain things, but that building and that shelter, and then you pay the county about $8,000 a year for that footprint through the IGA. So.
Linda, can I jump in and discuss a topic that comes up every year, and maybe just for Greg's benefit more than anyone else's? I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but now we've got a couple case in points here. So RMS, for example, that's maybe the best one. So we have a 4-year useful life, $3 million to replace. I think the decision is that we're going to do a refresh and proceed with that at a much less expense. But then shouldn't we go in here and, oh, I'm sorry, you got it there. But then shouldn't we go in here and adjust these numbers so we're not putting 750 away every year because we've now learned that there is an alternative? I mean, do we try to, I know you look at this stuff all the time. I don't. So maybe you've already captured that with what you're pointing out right now. But, and there's a couple other, you know, fire station alerting. In a couple of years, I don't think we'll be replacing that system. We just got it. Won't that be a refresh? Can we account for that so we're not putting too much money away?
Well, so the line that's highlighted is your cost this year for the refresh for both systems, RMS and CAD. And then you see the numbers above where they're highlighted because those are replacement years. So we look at FY27 being the next time you're either going to refresh or replace. So the question becomes, the short answer is I don't know the answer to that, because I don't know if in 4 years people are going to want to go to a different RMS system or a different CAD system. So if there's two PSAP directors here who want to talk about the CAD system and that part, the RMS side, one thing you could consider is you'd still have to budget for it, but since at a certain point the RMS group is supposed to be self-funded, you could stop putting money, earmarking money in the budget, and then in the year that you have it, that there's any replacement or any cost to the contract added in at that point. You're still doing the maintenance in arrears, but we could get off that mark.
Yeah, just stay on that one. So if we're not going to look at this until fiscal year 27 again, we've got $1.5 million in the bank now because we only are spending half of it. We're putting 750 in again, so we're going to have $5.25 million to make a $3 million expense if we go forward with it. That needs to be recalculated. We're over saving.
The 1.5 is your actual cost this year for the refresh.
Right, but we've been putting 750. We've been putting 750 away every year, so we're only spending half of that at 1.5. So we've got, again, this is all theoretical dollars. We don't track cash in and out on a specific project necessarily. And then four more years, and then we replace it. But so you're making a contribution in fiscal year 27. I just feel like we need to adjust these things once we learn kind of how we plan to replace them.
So the interesting part about it is you're as a board deciding to put $6.5 million into this capital contingency fund annually. If you look at the cost per year of what the replacement would be, which is down here, that far exceeds what you're contributing every year.
Well, that's because we got 20 million in the bank to start with.
No, no, the point being your capital contingency earmark is 6.5 million, but the cost for each of these, this is what the useful life is. That's not what you're contributing each year. If you were contributing each year, the full amount, which would be, you know, in 23, 12.8 million based on the useful life of all of those systems, that's not what you're contributing. So in a sense, and this is why I thought last year we made the adjustment to 6.5 million was, and that's why this plays out above into what your balances are going to be here, because here's what you have, here's what you contribute, here's what you're going to spend, here's your balance, and then you go all the way down the line to 10 years from now, you'd have 12 million in there ready for the next radio project if in fact you chose to do that. So you're not really contributing at the full rate of useful life annually.
I get the distinction you're making. I just think we've got to constantly readjust these to ensure that the 6.5 is correct. Because if what I'm saying should be adjusted, in my opinion, on the RMS side, if that's true for all these line items, we're overfunding the capital. Now, maybe that's not true. You know these items a hell of a lot better than I do.
Anyone else got any other thoughts on this topic?
Okay.
Go back to the generator real quick. I thought it was 1.7 million, the upfront cost, wasn't it?
For,
The generators? When they first were purchased,
oh, I don't know.
I thought it was 1.7 is what ETSB gave for
No.
the generators.
No. So 1.7, so the ETSB contributions were for building projects. So Ducom's contribution was 4 million, and Addison at the time calculated 1.7 because that was the size, that was the additional size to the building that they needed based on being able to house the sheriff and Ducom if they needed to come over. So the 1.7 was just building. However you chose to, if it bought the generator, then they bought the generator.
Yeah, I don't know.
It wasn't earmarked
There was the whole
specifically.
generator topic on that because who technically owns the generators?
You do.
And then you service it though.
I don't know. I think that Mr. Crotty it was still under warranty, so it could be added to the maintenance now.
Right after the maintenance, then Jim asked for ETSB to take over.
Got it.
So now it's just, there's a county contract for all the county generators, all the PSEP generators, and so it's on that maintenance schedule. Thank you. Uh-huh. And batteries, okay,
Moving on.
so I guess I don't know how we would make an adjustment if, or at what point you want to, so I guess I'd be looking for feedback on how you want to make the adjustment.
For RMS.
Well, RMS is something you could take out if you wanted to, because they're supposed to be self-funded. Then in the years that you're going to be, if there's a hardware replacement, or they do something different. So contractually, if the RMS group decided they didn't want to stay with Hexagon 4 years from now, because I'm assuming they're going to go, based on their conversations, they said they wanted to go ahead, the chiefs were okay with everything. So we're looking at the hardware refresh and the next upgrade. In 4 years, if everybody said, you know what, we want to go our own separate ways, we don't care, they're no longer on the contract and they had their own contract, ETSB would be completely out of it, because the only reason ETSB is part of it now is it's a combined contract. So there's that portion to it. So you could, as a board, make the recommendation that since their part of that IGA was for them to be self-funded, which is their capital contribution, which is supposed to get to 3 million, you could financially, just in the years where you need something, take something out of capital contingencies, get the reimbursement and put it back into your capital contingencies. Does that make sense?
I like that idea. Linda, and those that know better than I, do you always want a CAD and RMS coming from the same vendor though? I mean, if we're gonna change RMS, aren't we necessarily gonna want to do that with the CAD?
No.
No.
I don't know 100% the answer to that, but I think they could be separate. CAD's huge. We haven't been on this CAD that long. It works really well. It does all of the things that we've tasked it to do, and with the groups that we have in place, they continually make it better. I couldn't imagine wanting to replace CAD in the near future.
Well, I don't really want to replace RMS in the near future either. That's kind of my point.
And that's where you
Okay.
get frustration, where it's not, the CAD is living up to everything you want it to live up to, where RMS, it was not at the time when it initially rolled out. So there was all that frustration going on, saying, what are we paying this for and whatnot. So I think it's gotten better though, right? The chiefs have said it's working a little bit better and appeasing them. So I think it would be best to stay with the same. But, oh well.
Well, I would be in favor of, obviously, we need to confirm, I don't have the numbers in front of me on what's set aside in RMS through the work group, but I think we should consider taking that out. No reason to kind of double prepare for a replacement here. That could be an alteration. And then again, I think taking another look at this useful life, fire station alerting might be a good example, that it's unlikely we're going to replace that at 5 years. Should we put the useful life at 7 and indicate that includes a refresh and a replacement, and that adjusts those numbers a little bit, and it just gives us a better understanding of what those overall 10-year costs are, and then we know if we're 6.5 is the right number to be allocating every year. That'd be my 2 cents.
So do we know that that's the right life, or are we just pulling something out of the air and saying that'll look better for what we're trying to do?
Which one?
My belief is it's an extremely conservative approach, which isn't necessarily wrong, but it's extremely conservative.
And on what do you base that? Prior experience?
Yes, and just the fact that now we've got 3 or 4 of these things hitting, and we're not replacing any of them. We're refreshing.
So how long have we been holding them now and just refreshing? Well, I
Everyone's a
don't
little
know.
This would be the first refresh or replacement of the current systems that we have today. So
Okay.
we really we'll have a better idea of what those costs are. But, you know, the point is if we, let's take customer premise equipment, CPE, for example, if we refresh this time, then who's to say 4 years from now, we might not have to do a full blown replacement based on version. That's the challenge here. And that
Right.
was the discussion. Fire station alerting is one of those things where, you know, we won't know until we get to the first contract renewal. I think that Mark has a point. And there are some significant replacement costs here that we can look at, but the question becomes, do you need it and what you can do? We put some money in, you know, it's a software, so you're paying for the software. And then you have SIUs, is that right? SCUs, there we go. Wrong set of initials. SCUs are probably the most expensive piece, and then amps that go with this. The rest of it is smaller parts, lights, speakers, things like that. We've you know, and if the board remembers, you had significant contracts when you purchased this for several $100,000 of speakers and things that were beyond what we considered the core equipment to roll this out that agencies purchase. So, you know, we had a large amount of money. This year we've put in about, I think, 50,000, if I remember correctly, of replacement parts for things that agencies may identify as a need. So those numbers are decreasing, but you know, this is the first time we're hitting some of these renewals, so we don't really know. I
Okay.
think this year I would recommend you kind of leave it as it is, and because you're gonna go through a big roll this time around, and you'll have a better idea of where you're at and what those costs are. Because unfortunately, a refresh can be just as much as a replacement, depending on what you're doing. And I know it's conservative, but you're gonna be really unhappy if we get to a point and there isn't enough money. And remember, this is a capital contingency. So if your policy says you may use this for operating, if you get to a certain level in your operating, then, and you can make some of those decisions and transfer an item out if you're no longer gonna replace it. So I think it gives you some latitude to continue to provide the service level that you're providing today without making a hard decision. Because this is a capital contingency line item, it allows transfer out at any point. So, you know, you don't necessarily have, you know, we have to keep that money earmarked in the budget, but you don't have to move it into a capital expense line item until you're ready to use it. So I think maybe the devil's in the policy in detail.
I agree with everything you said. I agree. And
I
I
kind of
think
like
because,
conservative.
Go ahead, Gwen.
I said, I
Sorry.
kind of like conservative until we know a little bit more and are real comfortable with doing it some other way.
I didn't mean to cut you off, my fault. I concur. I think we can live with this. Minus, we should at least look at an RMS and decide what we want to do there, but we can live with this. We've got the big radio purchase that's going to drive a lot of this anyway in the next couple of years. We'll know more in future years, just something to always check in on.
So can I ask about RMS? Have I taken myself out?
Go ahead, Gwen.
So that's not needed, is what you're saying? We aren't required to fund that? Is that what I heard?
I'll take that. So it's under an ETSB, it's part of an ETSB contract. The state's attorney and looks like the FCC is going to say no to that being a surcharge expense. And so what we do is we budget for the maintenance and the capital replacement, but it's budget neutral. Because
Okay.
we put it into the budget, but we are reimbursed wholly by the RMS group for that money. So I have to show it, but it's really budget neutral because at some point it's in arrears, but it's being reimbursed.
well, wait a minute. Is being in arrears, it's something that we can accrue for if we know they have to reimburse us. And so we can actually pick it up as a revenue at the point that we know they have to reimburse us if there is a need.
We could show it that way. Especially now that they have,
That's what happens when you have an accountant.
Well, I think that it can be shown that way because now it's been 4 years. And so those agencies in the RMS group have been making that contribution. So there is money to do that. You know, in the first couple of years, there was not sufficient funds from the RMS group, and that's only the capital. So, so we could make it an accrual. So we can show it that way.
Does that mean we have an extra 750,000 a year then? Am I misunderstanding?
Well, yeah, it is and it isn't. So let me show it and then we'll see.
Okay, okay.
It's really more a matter of, so what it'll do here is if I take it out, I don't show the budget neutral portion of this because I didn't show the revenue coming in. So we'll take a look at it.
Okay.
It'll change
Just
this.
for everyone's knowledge, Joe was,
Go ahead, Mark.
I was just gonna make a comment. Joe's the new member of the RMS group. So Joe, you're gonna jump into this pretty soon.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Congratulations.
Hey, I appreciate that.
Brian?
I was just saying that it'll impact this sheet, but it won't, it still doesn't, I mean, it goes back to what Linda said earlier. It's not necessarily changing even in the next 3 years because of the fact that we're reserving 6.5, but we're spending the more anyway. So, I mean, it'll change and impact this sheet, but it doesn't necessarily change decisions as we move forward. So, I mean, we all have to be aware of that.
One other question. How confident are we on the 4 payments on the payments of the radios being over 4 years? Are we confident in that, or should we anticipate the worst case scenario
One
would
lump
be 2
sum.
or one lump sum? Like what?
I never do lump sum out of contracts. It usually goes to delivery. So I'm not wholly confident, but I'm not. I think it's possible. I wouldn't have put it in if I hadn't been that way. But that's why 10 years from now it's a half payment. Because I don't know what the circumstances would be. I don't even know if we're going to use the radios in 10 years. But so at this point, I've seen, I know contractually I could probably spend this over 4 years because for a couple of reasons. If everybody goes with the radios they're looking at, the challenge for the fire agencies today is there is a new NFPA standard available. There are radios on the market today that should meet those standards, but have not yet been certified. So there's some, I know, it's always fire. There's somewhat of a consensus in the fire service that if they can get to that new NFPA standard radio, that's what they should do. So I anticipate as you're rolling this out, you're going to be over some lifetime. If you don't end up getting an actual asset for a couple of years, then those payments might scrunch up, but so your money's still gonna be there.
Thank you.
Scrunch up is a technical financial.
All right, moving on.
All right, so some of these other tabs are, this is just the homework. And you've seen this in the revenue tab. This is the surcharge. So basically, back up onto how we got there. This is your payment of claims. So this is the things you see on your agenda every year. This is, Eve did nice work here, figuring out what we think we might have to pay in the next couple of months. So that's how we calculated it. This is the summary that was sent or posted. And it's a nice job right here. You're seeing in a time when things are a little bit iffy, some nice reductions. And that comes from, we're now past a lot of consolidation work. We've got a couple of things left to pay, nothing huge and significant. And we've been down the road for 2 years in implementation and kind of where we're at. So we're able to look at some of these line items and make some reductions. Now I know, so where you're seeing some changes because we've moved some dollars around. That's one thing. Commodities this year is bigger, and that's because this line item, there's no dollar there because it's kind of a new thing. We moved some money out of the small tools based on the finance department's recommendation. So what you're seeing here is Motorola. You do 3 open purchase orders, CDW, Dell. CDW is all small parts, computer, keyboards, blah, blah, blah. Dell, for the last 12 years, 13 years, the 911 system has used Dell equipment for the dispatch centers and, just about everything else. So we have a Dell open purchase order for smaller parts and replacement parts. That doesn't include your big replacement purchases. And you have an open purchase order for Motorola for depot costs for the current portable radios. We can look at this line item in a little more detail if you want, but the explanation is you now have batteries in here for existing equipment and repairs. So it's a little hefty, and as noted in the memo, once the radios are replaced, this number will go down. And this is also an area where the board can make a decision and a recommendation. Your current policy, your accessory policy said that in December of 2020, that agencies would be responsible for their own accessories. When the decision was made to delay the radio replacement, the board decided to keep those costs. And the policy specifically says, until such time as the radios are replaced. Now, throughout this 10-year projection, I have kept that dollar amount in that battery at about 100,000 plus or minus, because we think we're going to keep a few extra of the current existing radios for CSOs and things like that. If the board says, yep, we're going to follow that policy, and once the radios are replaced, you're on your own for, holsters and batteries and things like that, we can take that money out of the budget, and that's about $600,000 in about 3 years. But so a little bit farther down the road, but we can take that out. So that's another question we make. But this line item will drop once the radios start to be replaced.
Were you guys on the board when you had that discussion about doing away with purchasing accessories?
You all were, yeah.
So what was, so what's your, you guys were around, what's your thoughts on that then, and what's your thoughts on it now?
I don't remember the discussion that, came to us. I think from my point of view on it, the issue was different people were buying different stuff, and it went in a whole bunch of different directions. And then it's hard for ETSB to be responsible for replacing. So if one agency chose to go buy accessories, then it was what's in the field, right? And so that was one of the challenges, is that we didn't have strong, this is strange, we had policies about what they could buy. They weren't all followed, would be maybe the way of like, they bought a lot of other stuff, and then knowing what the responsibility was for that. But then in the end, we're like, well, I mean, they all came with speaker mics. So at the end of the day, right now, with the push of the project, that's when we thought, well, we should keep things working. And then some of those things also became system dependent, specifically remote speaker mics in general were causing radio interference issues. So there were older versions that impacted at least TDMA radios on the police side, that they were forcing the channels down to FDMA because of a certain model make of the mic. So then replacing that mic became more important. So I mean, multiple factors, multiple things.
I mean, if we continue to be responsible for things like batteries and microphones, and those are just the basics.
But again, you can put different microphones on the radio. So then if Department A puts a different mic on the radio, I think we'd either have to get into a very specific policy of these models are covered and replaceable. You know what I mean? But even every time anyone did that, it impacted us as the maintainers, because if you went and bought like, I'm gonna make this up, I'm maybe close, or maybe not, but like a commander mic or something, then not only did you just go buy a new mic, but then maintainer had to create a new code plug for the radio. And so now we go from, you know, as it was, we had 60 some minimum, we're gonna have 60 some code plugs for each agency. And now it's each radio at each agency, which means we have hundreds of code plugs. And then if the accessory drives the code plug, again,
Is it unreasonable to,
I think it's work the PAC could do as far as next time around. Are we gonna try to put a fence around how this works? And then where do we go from there? But I think there's, you know, it works both ways, because anyone can pick up a phone and find somebody to sell you a Motorola accessory. And so we were finding out about stuff after the fact.
Today, with the number of radios that you have in the system today, a battery replacement for each radio is about $330,000. So I felt the same way.
Who was that?
I felt the same way. So that's, you know, when you start looking at costs, you know, an agency with 40 radios buying batteries versus you know, how do you want to spend your money? But I agree with Brian that, you know, there has to be some parameters on how that works just for the holistic approach of the radios and interoperability.
And there are departments, I mean, all efforts were made to have a fair and equal distribution of radios, but there are departments that have had more radios or had less radios. So you could have a situation where one department is sitting there pulling batteries out of, well, even police officers, they could be sitting there and have a dead battery and going to us and sort of an off, you know, it was almost envisioned that an officer would got a personal charger, a police officer was getting a personal charger and 2 batteries. It's very easy to maintain that, charging in between shifts, always have a fresh radio, always have a fresh battery, good to go, and your batteries are going to last longer. Change that to a different setup where there's this bank of batteries and you're just hot swapping batteries and they're never getting right charged, never getting reconditioned. You're going to drain and ruin the batteries quicker, so that the personal responsibility of usage becomes an impact on it. We were finding, I think in the maintainer numbers, we were finding some departments batteries failing at greater percentages than other departments. So it was use and training and possibly availability of batteries overall. Okay. So again, these things, if we take, right now the PAC, as I understand, is trying to rush to what is the decision, because the decision will take time to take the purchase. But then I think they already know that they have operational recommendations that they're going to need to make that we'll see moving forward. It's okay.
thank you.
All right. So also places, you know, again, you know, you see some big reduction numbers here, but they're really small numbers because we aren't being charged what we thought we were, et cetera, et cetera. The big places where we save money and save money long term is wired communications, down 13%. But you know, when I started, this line item was $2.3 million, and there were about 75 phone accounts. Today, we have about 7 accounts because we're down to 2 PSAPs. We're down to a different type of, you know, again, so this is 10 years later, how we deliver the 911 call, all those accounts, all those numbers, all those different PSAPs, and all the huge work you did, you know, clear that up with you know, I mean, 2 years of reconciling a contract with AT&T, stamina. So, you know, you're down, and now we've gotten rid of the, you know, we're cleaning up the last of consolidation. So Wall Street and Friendship are off of the Comcast contract. You know, we still have a connection through the sheriff's office with Comcast. That's how we connect. ETSB connects to the county for county systems like ERP and things like that. And we left one large pipe for testing because we found a benefit to having, one of the things we found when we were testing some switches and some other configurations is because we had Wall Street and a couple of places that weren't active Friendship, we were able to test without impacting the system or an actual PSAP. So since it's part of the contract at this point and we're still showing a reduction, we've left that that pipeline up for now. When we come back to major contract renewal with this, we can talk about the best way to do that later. So I think, you know, we're under $1 million. That's pretty significant considering you're 10 years down the road and you're saving, and that's an annual operating expense. Most of the things in there are going to pretty much stay put up, other than the contract for the Comcast. Repair and maintenance of equipment, you know, we're seeing some reduction there. Where's my other large reduction? Software maintenance agreements, again, here's where we're cleaning up a bunch of things, and you know, we're cleaning up and reducing, but at the same time you see increases because these are the multipliers in these contracts. So, you know, one of the things, to Joe's point of people were frustrated by RMS, not only that, but there was sticker shock because the maintenance cost for the old system at that point, because there were no upgrades and there were no updates, was insignificant, and there was huge sticker shock because these maintenance for CAD and RMS go over $1 million collectively. So when you see those numbers, it's painful. And then when it's not working the way you want it to, it's really painful. So we're over that. Other contractual expenses, this is a reduction. Again, we're getting, you know, we're finishing up things, we're getting rid of things that we don't need anymore. So that's a nice reduction there. So overall, the picture is, and this is just operating. So personnel, and the reason personnel has a significant dip is we had one employee who during COVID with spousal layoffs and things like that, thought they might have to go on county insurance, and that didn't happen. So we added the money in, we didn't need it, they don't need it. So we're reducing, and that's all. That is the ETSB portion of the health insurance, which as managers, you've seen before and know it's expensive. So that's where that reduction comes from. And then the contractual, again, is just the cleanup that we've done. It's down 10%. So very nicely overall, you're down 8%.
Very good. Any questions? Good job.
That's pretty impressive to be down 8%.
Thank you. Without
See it on our budget.
Yeah, agreed. Really, really good budget. Thanks for running through all that. I'm sorry, I might have missed it, Linda. Where do we account for the $1 million transfer? Is that in the capital budget? Did we just go over that? Maybe I missed it. I'm sorry. I'm talking about the
I know what you're talking about.
PSAP transfer.
I know what you're talking about. So it's not anywhere yet because it's not operating. It's not anywhere in the operating budget, but if we go back to the revenue page, it's right here.
There you
So
go.
it's shown. And then typically what happens is I throw that money into the capital budget because I don't like to show it in my operating because it affects my actual operating number and it's not really operating. And then then assuming that this is done via an IGA, it would come out of it would be moved into other contractual expenses because most of our IGA work where we're doing reimbursements and things like that come out of that line item. So
Okay. That makes sense.
It's accounted for in the overall cash flow, but it's not in the budget yet. So it's there. Make sense?
Thank you.
Once you decide on capital and what's going to go, then I can put it in there and we'll do a final number when we get closer to budget appropriation numbers. So that's the big part. Are you antsy because we've been an hour?
Go ahead.
I did do, oops. There is a 10-year budget summary in that tab as well, and it goes out long. Again, you know, it's based on those assumptions we ran over earlier. So you've seen the just comparison from this year to next year or what we're requesting. Do you want me to run through any of the tabs of individual line items? So you have salaries and things like that?
No need for me.
Not for me either. 10 years is kind of, I won't say useless, but almost.
we knew what the surcharge was gonna be. But you know, it does provide some certain pictures, but it's just, I think that Gwen is correct. There's so many wild assumptions there on where we're gonna be at, but at least it paints a bit of a picture.
And just so, make sure I got it right, the three main assumptions that impact the unknown is surcharge staying at the same basic rate, right? And continuing all the way through 2% for personnel, as you factored every year in that,
Cost of living, yeah.
the cost of living, and then 3% on your contracts.
Well, yeah, and
3% where there's annual fees.
on operating, yes, I think the bigger assumptions are capital.
Sure, but I
Because-
just meant in the operating side.
Yeah,
And then capital we've already sort of covered with the long term.
Right.
I'm sorry, Brian, what was the third thing you said there?
Where operating contracts exist, there's an assumed 3% increase in
Yes.
those contracts. So I
Right.
just-
Okay, thank you.
Those are the three complete assumptions that drive all the way across the 10 years outside of capital.
Yep,
and then the only other wild card in capital is text to 911, and you know, I put $1 million in there because we're in the throes of CPE update, and that somewhat ties together. That's admittedly rather high, but because the directors haven't really decided how they want that to lay out or what it's going to look like, I'd rather be wrong with enough and have left over than not. And then once I'm assuming that will probably end up being part of the CPE, because that's usually where it sits today in terms of technology, and then we'll be able to make an adjustment there.
Anybody have anything else for the moment? All right, we've been here an hour, 15 minutes, so thank you, everybody. Thank you, Linda. It was an excellent report. We are meeting again on the 15th at 2 p.m. right here and/or on Zoom. And I'll need a motion to adjourn.
Hold on one second.
Oh, stand by.
So your tasks are comments on generator, and then I will work on an accrual adjustment with the treasurer for RMS and give you an idea of what that looks like. Were there any other tasks you wanted me to do with the budget as it is right now?
Mark?
yeah, just 2 quick points. On the RMS side too, Linda, I just don't know how much money is in the bank with them. I just can't remember those numbers. Let's make sure we understand what they've already set aside and make that part of the recommendation. And then my other point was just kind of looking ahead. So we've got 2 more meetings. We kind of ran through the entire budget. I'm pretty comfortable. I don't know what the rest of the committee thinks. But what's our tasks for the next meeting? I mean, is staffing coming back up? Is that the big piece of this budget?
I actually would like to talk about that. I didn't want to bring it up today, but let's have that discussion at least.
Okay. And will we have something to chew on before that meeting?
Is that a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Are we going to have some kind of staffing report or preliminary report from Linda for that meeting, or is this more theoretical discussion?
I think, at least from my perspective, it's a theoretical discussion.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, on the open items list on your memo, you had budget submission, so I'm waiting to see if there's anything else coming from PSEPs that's not already in the budget. Policy, I'm working on a draft of your equipment replacement policy. The intergovernmental agreement. At this point, the directors have been working and there's some bare bones, but now with the FCC ruling, I think we're gonna have to, we can continue to keep putting language together, but we'll have to be mindful of how that's gonna impact it. So that's, and then ordinance update as it goes, the staffing, the PSEP allocation. It's not really an open item. But I put it into open because I'm assuming we're just gonna, but I guess the question would be, are you leaving it at $1 million? And are you gonna go ahead with it? So that, you know, that I'm pretty sure yes to the second part. I don't know if we're gonna try to do more or less or whatever. And then that's all I have at this point. The other question would be the accessories for the batteries that you should be thinking about, how you want to do accessories. And I think, Brian, do you want to maybe make a maybe we can make a recommendation on how that could go, or do you want to leave it with back?
I think PAC should opine on accessories first, and I think they've got to look at what's being, gonna be given to each, service and what is the base order.
I was amazed at the battery cost.
Well, you have 3,500 radios, so.
Hopefully, they're not sitting in the
Yes,
warehouse in Morris, because then they might have gone up in price.
So, yeah. Okay, anything else?
Okay,
Thank you, Linda. Really good information. Thanks for putting it all together.
So moved. Second.
We have motion and second.
Please call the roll. Motion Moranowitz, so Moranowitz. You guys, Tegmeyer,
Aye.
Steves. Aye. Shorzy.
Aye.
Franz,
Yes.
Henry.
Yes.
All right then. All right,